Massachusetts. I think we can get started. Claire, would you like to kick us off with some of the technical information that everybody needs to know?
Thank you, Judy. Welcome, everyone. We are offering interpretation for this meeting in Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Spanish, Cantonese, and Vietnamese. And so if you would like interpretation, hopefully you can read the screen to find your spot, but clicking on the interpretation button and selecting the appropriate language. We can go to the next slide. We are recording this webinar. At this time, interpreters, please do press the record button in your room, and we will be posting the recording, and the slides are actually already up at mass.gov/2030 CECP. The lines will remain muted during the presentation, but we'll be unmuting folks to provide oral comments after the presentation. If you would like to provide comments, we're going to be asking you to raise your hand. So if you know you want to provide comments, feel free to raise your hand at any time, and we'll walk you through that when we get to that portion of the presentation. And if you have any clarifying questions or logistical issues, please type it into the chat box, and we will try to address it as we move through. But with that, if we can go to the next slide. I'd like to welcome Judy Chang, the Undersecretary of Energy, to share with us about the plan, and apologies for the date. This is the March 15th version, the evening version, sorry, we didn't fix this title slide. But take it away, Judy.
Thank you very much, Claire, and thank you everybody for joining us this evening for this webinar. And first of all, I'd like to say that I appreciate your patience with the rescheduling of the date and the time of the webinar. We had tried to schedule this earlier in the year, but our whole team was actually working hard through after December 30 when we first published the report, to work with our legislatures on the proposed climate bill, and I will talk a little bit more about that later. So I hope that this has given you additional time to review and process the information in the interim 2030 Clean Energy Climate Plan that was released last year on December 30th. So I'm going to first spend some time to present the high-level findings and in the CECP, the Clean Energy Climate Plan, and then we will have a listening session where we can hear everybody's comments. A number of people have already asked about the current climate bill that's in the legislation, in the legislature being debated, and its potential impact on this 2030 plan. As you probably know, that the amended bill is currently still being debated for consideration, and therefore we don't actually know the exact way that the final bill will affect the CECP, but we certainly look forward to a continued dialogue with our legislators and the stakeholders as we work to achieve the common goals. Governor Baker has returned the climate legislation with a series of key targeted amendments. Most of those amendments were accepted, but it's still being debated in the legislature. He definitely looks forward to signing the amended bill. I am optimistic that we can work through the differences and get to an agreement on the final bill, which I believe will maximize Massachusetts' ability to achieve net zero emissions by 2050 in the most cost-effective way and in the most equitable way, and mark a significant milestone for the Commonwealth's leadership on climate change. I will summarize our approach and strategies for aggressively reducing the greenhouse gas emissions in the next decade, for this next decade, to position ourselves to achieve the net zero emissions by 2050. And then I will listen to the oral comments that you may have on the plan. The last decade, and especially the last years, really has been an exciting time here in Massachusetts as we make significant progress in safeguarding Massachusetts environmental resources while taking aggressive action on climate change, while preparing for its inevitable impact on our communities. Massachusetts has always been a leader on environmental issues, responsibility, and governance, and I'm extremely proud to be part of this team and making an effort taking the next step. Next slide, please. This slide just depicts what it means to get to net zero by 2050. Now, before the pandemic disrupted our schedules and our lives, 2020 was already, we were starting with really strong activities, setting the right course to combat climate change. Governor Baker at that time set an aggressive target for Massachusetts to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. That target is consistent with the science, where we need to be, and it is ambitious, and it is going to be difficult but achievable. I'm also glad to see that many other jurisdictions have followed suit. And I think this is a recognition of saying that this is what the science says we need to be as society. Which is why EEA, the Energy and Environmental Affairs team here, is engaged in a comprehensive science-based roadmap analysis. We want to map out the pathways available to achieve this climate goal. Next slide, please. On the slide, you see the cover of really 2 years of hard work from many team members to look at our decarbonization roadmap. Of course, we recognize that the ability to solve climate crisis requires state leadership. We know the cost of inaction could be devastating to our economy, our health, and our environment, which is why we are taking a leadership role as the first state in the nation to release a comprehensive study to achieve the net zero emissions by 2050. This study is an economy-wide study. This means that we looked at every sector of the economy and tried to understand how to bring us all together to a net zero emissions by 2050. Now, the 2-year analysis used the best models and the analytical tools available to explore. And it involved people who have done this kind of analyses for other countries and looked at it from a global perspective and really dived into deep on every sector in detail. And it analyzed the steps that the Commonwealth and the region needs to take to achieve our goal of net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, while maintaining a healthy, equitable, and thriving economy in Massachusetts. Now, this long-range study and analysis is informing our effort for the next decade. The reason I lead in with this whole decarbonization roadmap study is because it is a scenario-based approach to look into the future and look at different scenarios, how we might achieve net zero by 2050. And the reason it's important to look at the longer term is because the next decade is really the stepping stone to the longer term. And we also can't wait until the last decade or 2040s to achieve what we set for ourselves in 2050. Even though 2050 sounds like a long time or a long, far away time frame, we actually need to act now in this particular moment, in this particular decade. So if you haven't already, I do encourage you to review the roadmap study, the 2050 roadmap report, which is posted online at the link at the top of the slide. Also posted with the roadmap are 6 technical reports that provide much detail behind the analysis for each sector as well as the analysis of economic and health impacts from decarbonization pathway to 2050. If nothing else, these technical appendices provide a lot of information. It's a great resource for people who want to learn more about how to really work together to decarbonize our economy. Next slide, please. Through this roadmap analysis, we are focused on making sure that while we keep our options open, we also need to act now, because many opportunities only occur several times in the next 3 decades, and we need to have a plan to understand how we achieve them. And overall, the lowest risk pathway to net zero has a few elements. First, a balanced clean energy portfolio anchored by significant amount of offshore wind resources as well as solar resources. More interstate transmission lines to allow us to access the diverse renewable generation and clean energy in our neighboring states as well as in Canada. And this does not necessarily mean new transmission lines, but it may mean upgrading our existing system to access to a diverse portfolio of clean energy that we can access to. And the third thing is widespread electrification of transportation and building heat so that we can plug basically our transportation system and our buildings to that clean energy system or clean electricity system. And then lastly, but most importantly, reduce costs by replacing energy infrastructure when it is up for replacement. This means that we only have so many opportunities to change people's purchasing decisions to make sure that when a car is at its end of life, that's an opportunity for people to purchase a new car. And how do we create incentives for people to transition to electric vehicles at an affordable level? The modeling and the assumptions for the 2050 roadmap were mostly built off a pre-COVID understanding of the trends and the dynamics of our economy. Certainly, we have learned how to live and in this strange environment, and we can all assess that there are some potential long-lasting impact, and particularly the way we work, particularly the way we transport ourselves. And while we haven't really conducted an in-depth analysis and to incorporate any of these lessons learned or best practices during the COVID timeframe into the 2050 roadmap, we are interested in that impact and the trends, so that if after analyzing the impact of COVID and understanding what the longer lasting impact would be, we would try to incorporate that in a future clean energy climate plans. Next slide, please. So to put us in the best position to achieve the net zero by 2050, the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs had set an emissions limit of 45% below 1990 levels by 2030. This strikes the best balance and the right balance because it sets us on the course to hit our net zero goals while balancing the economic costs. Now, this target is ambitious, and it is probably the most ambitious in the state's targets across the country. And it will allow us, though, to take advantage of end-of-life stock turnover. This is when a car needs to be replaced, as I just mentioned, or a furnace needs to be replaced at its end of life. This is the best time to make the replacements because those decisions will need to be made anyway, and we hope that people could transition to a use of a different technology, possibly, so that we can use clean electricity to power both our transportation and our heating for the buildings. It gives us time and flexibility to develop new markets and take advantage of the technology breakthroughs and innovations in our own clean tech sector as they are working on these today. It is, however, quite aggressive in the sense that we need to act now to make the plans coherent and to create incentives for people to make the transition. If we're going to meet our ambitious climate goals in 2050, we definitely have to act now. And that's why this 2030 Clean Energy Climate Plan is actually a critical step to take over the next 10 years so that we can position ourselves to achieve the longer term goals. Next slide, please. So what does it look like to get to a 40% reduction by 2030? As you can see here, to meet our ambitious 2030 goal and position our state to achieve the net zero by 2050, we need to make significant progress in the coming years. We will need to retrofit about 1 million homes, support highly efficient new construction, and help people adopt clean heating solutions like the various heat pump technologies already on the market. We will need to put over 750,000 new zero-emission vehicles, such as electric vehicles, on the road and achieve a 15% reduction in commuting vehicle miles traveled. And we will need to build and interconnect about 6,000 megawatts of clean energy and modernize our electric grid to support the development of these clean energy resources. The 2030 Clean Energy Climate Plan establishes the blueprint for achieving these goals equitably and affordably, with major and new initiatives advancing decarbonization of the Commonwealth buildings, transportation, and electricity sector. So I'm going to go into each of the sectors briefly. Next slide, please. The 2030 plan outlines bold action to pivot the building sector to high efficiency buildings and clean heat. Now, during this year, Massachusetts will create a new net zero high performance stretch building energy code to ensure our newest buildings are resilient and energy efficient. Communities can adopt the stretch code starting next year, with code becoming mandatory and effective statewide by 2028. But about 80% of the buildings we'll have in 2050 are actually standing now. So it's not only important that we have stretch codes for our new buildings, we also need to focus on taking bold actions on existing buildings. And this is going to be extremely challenging, but we need to set our path in doing so now. First, we will pivot the Mass Save program, which is an energy efficiency program, limiting fossil fuel heating system incentives in the next 3-year plan for 2022 through 2024, and then ending all fossil fuel heating system incentives by the end of 2024. We will also expand access to energy efficiency and clean heating for low and moderate income renters and homeowners in environmental justice communities through targeted community-based incentives and outreach programs. While the 2030 plan mentions air source heat pumps several times, we actually mean really all available technology, including air source heat pumps, but also including other types of heat pumps and electric heat water heaters, solar, hot water, as well as declining emissions through best practices such as preventative maintenance of HVAC. In addition to measures to decarbonize existing buildings, we have a plan forward to cap and reduce emissions from the building sector in general. We will convene a governor's commission for clean heat, as well as an interagency clean heat task force. This work will build on the Department of Public Utilities study to assess the role of natural gas companies in ensuring a low carbon future and explore strategies that will enable the Commonwealth to achieve net zero emissions while safeguarding ratepayers' interest in securing safe, reliable, and affordable natural gas service. By the end of 2021, the Commission and Task Force on Clean Heat will recommend a framework for new long-term declining emissions cap for heating fuels used in the state. And this would include natural gas, fuel oil, and propane. By the end of 2022, they will recommend statutory, regulatory, and financing mechanism needed to ensure that the development of a reliable and affordable clean heat solution for all of our buildings. Next slide, please. Next slide, I'm going to focus on the transportation sector. In the transportation sector, the Transportation and Climate Initiative Program, or the TCIP, is central to our strategy. TCIP is a multi-state cap and in a multi-state program that will reduce motor vehicle pollution by at least 26% and generate $1.8 billion in Massachusetts by 2032 to invest in the transport sector to ensure that we have an equitable and cleaner transportation options. The program will require large gasoline and diesel fuel suppliers to purchase allowances for pollution that results from the combustion of fuels they sell in the region. And then the revenues from the sale of the emissions allowance will be invested in clean transportation options, thus providing a dedicated funding source for increasing the deployment of zero-emission vehicle, expanding the electric vehicle charging infrastructure network, and electrifying transit buses. No less than 35% of the proceeds from the auction of the allowances will be set aside to ensure that overburdened and underserved communities benefit equitably from the clean transportation projects and programs. As TCIP gets started and given potential changes in the federal and regional transportation initiatives, we will closely monitor the funding needs to support the programs to achieve our 2030 emissions limit and beyond. In addition to that, Massachusetts will join California in mandating that by 2035, 100% of new light-duty vehicles sold in Massachusetts will be zero emissions vehicles. For medium and heavy-duty vehicles, we join with 15 other jurisdictions in a coordinated effort to have 30% of all new trucks and buses sold in Massachusetts be zero-emission vehicles by 2030, increasing to 100% sales by 2050. We will continue to create incentives for the purchases of new zero-emission vehicles, both light-duty and heavy-duty, through state rebates and incentive programs, and support the continued build-out of robust, smart, statewide charging infrastructure to ensure we address concerns about range anxiety throughout the state. To reduce harmful air pollutions from diesel-powered vehicles, the Commonwealth will work with neighboring states to develop and implement low-carbon fuel standards by 2026. While electrifying our vehicles and decarbonizing our transportation fuels are important strategies, we will also pursue strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled, including strengthening incentives and opportunities to lock in permanent reductions in the number of vehicle miles traveled annually by commuters statewide. We will also continue to encourage and incentivize a broad range of smart growth. Smart growth policies will encourage fewer and shorter motor vehicle trips, prioritize development near public transit, and enable the use of alternative zero carbon mobility options like walking and biking. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to talk about the energy sector. We will need to ensure that our landmark nation-leading clean energy and clean transmission procurement, including 3.2 gigawatt of offshore wind, 1 gigawatt of hydropower, and 3.2 gigawatt of smart solar program come online, as those will be essential in achieving our 2030 limits. These are all programs that have already been designed, and we were on our pathways to developing them and implementing them. We will facilitate a path to market for an additional 2 gigawatt of new distributed clean generation between 2025 and 2030, an additional 6 gigawatt of offshore wind in Massachusetts beyond 2030. Additionally, we will continue to lead in multi-state efforts that the governors of all the New England states have committed to realign our regional system planning. That means transmission planning, markets, our wholesale electricity markets, and our wholesale operations with state decarbonization efforts. We have received some comments and questions around the accounting and assumption for electricity generation. We definitely have built our 2030 plan and the roadmap, 2050 roadmap, based on the accounting methodology and emissions rate from the Mass DEP greenhouse gas inventory. But we do expect to update the inventory in the next few years to adjust our calculations accordingly so that we can ensure that we meet our 2030 limit. Next slide, please. I want to talk next about non-energy sector. In the interim 2030 Clean Energy Climate Plan, a lot since we have published it, a lot has happened at the federal level. We expect to update the discussion around federal actions in the final 2030 plan, including the passage of the American Innovation and Manufacturing Act, or the AIM Act, that enacts a phase down of hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs. HFCs are potent climate pollutants commonly used as coolants in air conditioners and refrigerators. We will be implementing a regulation to limit the sale of HFCs in the Commonwealth, and will support policies at the federal level, like the AIM Act, that further curb the emissions from highly potent climate pollutants. We will also be working with other agencies across the state to ensure best practices are in place around waste, wastewater, and agricultural emissions. Next slide. The land sector. The land sector analysis from our 2050 roadmap study indicates that our trees and our vegetation are sequestering about 5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. Combined with 45% reduction in gross emissions, this type of sequestering will help Massachusetts reach a 50% net zero emissions by 50% reduction of the net emissions by 2030. Now, the gross emissions are the total emissions that one can account for without factoring the sequestration. So once we account for the carbon sequestration, that's what we consider net emissions. In the next 2 years, we will update the statewide GHG emissions inventory to support and track carbon sequestration as part of the new effort to align emissions accounting with a net zero by 2050. Massachusetts has a good track record of protecting our natural and working lands, including an innovative urban tree planting program in our gateway cities. Massachusetts Resilient Lands Initiative and Healthy Soil Action Plan include best land management practices that the Commonwealth will be implementing in the coming years to protect ecosystem health and enhance carbon sequestration. Massachusetts is also collaborating with neighboring states to incentivize the regional use of harvested wood in long-lived products such as cross-laminated timber and wood-based building insulation, which help harvested carbon remain stored and support the local and regional economy. Our natural and working land alone will not be enough to help Commonwealth reach net zero by 2050. Therefore, we will convene an interagency task force on carbon sequestration to advise on the development of a net zero accounting framework and a carbon sequestration market framework by 2025. The public comment period closes on March 22nd. Next slide, please. Hopefully you've had time to evaluate, to assess, and to review the Clean Energy Climate Plan, and we welcome all of your comments in addition to what we're going to hear today. Over this month and next, after we receive the comments, we will review them, and our plan is to release a finalized document at the end of April. I really appreciate you joining us today and to learn about this critical plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade. And I very much look forward to listening to other comments as you provide them this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. If we can go to the next slide, we are going to be opening it up for public comments. We had quite a few folks sign up to provide comments, so we're going to ask to aim for 2 minutes or less, but we will give you up to 3 minutes if you need it. Please click on the raise hand function within Zoom and we will know to call on you. We'll call on folks first who signed up in advance and let us know they would be providing comment, as well as folks who did not already provide comment last week, but I believe we should be able to get through everyone. So with that, I'm going to go and it looks like Lucia is first on the list. So you should be able to unmute yourself. Lucia, are you there?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Lucia Dolan. I'm with the 350 Mass Transportation Working Group, and I'm only going to discuss the transportation section because that's the one we've paid most attention to. And we're very concerned about the lack of goals for increasing, expanding, and electrifying public transit in the CECP. We find it worrying that MassDOT is in 2021, its capital investment plan is purchasing 460 diesel buses and 25 diesel trains, committing the state to diesel for decades. As the CECP itself states, transportation is the largest sector of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. It is the only sector of greenhouse gas emissions that's increasing. The CECP also states that increases in vehicle miles traveled may offset some or all of the benefits from fuel switching, electrifying in other words, and alternative transportation modes. Both environmental justice and smart growth depend on mass transit. And I realized part of the TCI funding is planning on going towards mass transit, but I still think it needs to be much more than that. We urge the state to reduce both greenhouse gases and particulate matter pollution by committing to increasing, expanding, and electrifying transportation, public transportation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Lucia, excuse me. We'll go next to Audrey Schulman. I am allowing you to talk now. Go ahead, Audrey.
Okay, thanks so much. I just wanted to say that with the building energy efficiency, one of the problems with air source heat pumps is that you generally have to have enough extra income to be able to afford them or good enough credit to do so. So it can be an equity issue, especially given that the energy bills can be more expensive afterwards. And have you considered instead, you know, if we all do that, begin one by one to leave the gas system, that will leave the people who can least afford it on the gas system, and will result in stranded assets, you know, with the low income who can't afford a new heating system, bearing the costs of that fixed cost system, which will gradually balloon per person. Then that seems like a horrible way to go. So have you instead considered networked geothermal, which could be installed by the gas companies, moving us forward at their using their financing, with their ability to install it in the right of way in the street, with their customers, that might help us meet our goals faster and avoid the stranded assets and allow the gas workers to continue to have their jobs. And because networked ground source heat pumps have some of the highest efficiencies known, and also would result, if they're networked together, you can do energy sharing and energy canceling. So in other words, the supermarket on the corner can take cooling off of the system and make the water hotter for the houses down the street. And if it were all paid for, so increasing the energy efficiency, if it were all paid for by the gas company, that would reduce the equity issues and allow us to move forward faster. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Audrey. I am going next to Fran Cummings. Fran, I've just unmuted you. I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity for all of us to comment. Consistent with the comments that I made a year ago in Worcester, I really recommend that the state be more ambitious even than you already have. And I recognize that you've done a lot, and this is a great plan in a way, but 50% by 2030 is only the global average that the IPCC said would be necessary. And Massachusetts is a developed economy with advanced capabilities, and we've also have responsibility for our historic emissions. And so clearly we're going to need to be able to do better than other parts of the globe. And so I really don't think we should feel satisfied with the notion that, well, the globe has to do 50%, so we'll do 50%. So my other comment would just be that I think this plan needs to identify more specific actions that will be taken and funding sources, whether from Massachusetts or the federal government or the private sector. It's a little too much hope and not enough real working plan, in my view. So thanks for comments, and I'll say more in written comments.
Thank you, Fran. I am going next to Stephen Dodge. I am giving you the ability to talk. Oh, go ahead, Stephen.
Great, thanks so much. My name is Stephen Dodge. I'm from the National Biodiesel Board. I just want to preface my remarks by just reading a couple of short sentences directly from the report. And my comments are really focused on the building sector, the thermal sector. And the report says, transitioning the building sector in a strategic and least cost manner is challenging, as it relies on immediately starting to leverage stock turnover points. The relatively long life of HVAC equipment, often 20 to 30 years, means that equipment installed in the 2020s may still be in service by 2050. This underscores that sales of electrified and other clean or renewable heating alternatives need to ramp up quickly to take advantage of these many transition points. And it goes on to say that transitioning to a heat pump HVAC system will have varying impacts on consumer energy costs, and particularly on low-income households. And our feeling is that there's a missing piece of the puzzle here. And one of the missing pieces, I think one of the previous speakers talked about, but we feel there's a missing piece, and that's biofuels, which is not really mentioned at all in this report. It's mentioned in the 2050 Pathways report. In fact, ironically, it's one of the suggestions mentioned in the medium and heavy-duty transportation sector. And I think we would suggest if it's good enough for medium and heavy-duty transportation sector, it should be good enough, at least as one piece of the puzzle for the thermal heating sector as well. And as you may know, the heating oil industry is proactively working towards reducing the carbon intensity of its fuel. A couple of years ago, the industry passed the so-called Providence Resolution, which establishes the attainable goal of achieving a 15% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2023 using B20, goes on up to net zero using B100 by 2050. And other states have seen this as a pathway, as I mentioned, New York, Rhode Island, California on the transportation side. The transition electricity is really a laudable goal, and it can make sense if it's affordable, if the infrastructure is capable of handling the load, and the source of the electricity is low carbon, as you point out. However, reaching that level of decarbonization will take many years and lots of money. And I'll just quickly end by using myself as an example. Back in January, my furnace went. It was in the 20s. My daughter was home from school. My wife was teaching from home. I was working from home. We did not have the luxury of, or the option of trying to transition our heating system, which is forced hot water now, into any type of electricity, type of heat pump. So we went with a furnace again, and our last one lasted 25 years, and maybe this one will as well. So my point is, there is a pathway that's missing in this report, and we feel that biofuels should be actively, and bioheat should be actively considered as a viable pathway to 2030, as it's mentioned in the 2050 report. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Great, thank you, Stephen. I'm going to go next to Claire Chang. I've just unmuted you. Go ahead, Claire.
Hi there, thank you very much. I'm sorry for the noise here. So I wanted to comment on the energy sector portion. The report says 1 gigawatt of solar per year, no, 1 gigawatt of wind per year and 500 megawatts of solar per year. That is vastly under the number that we need to be aiming for. The Brattle report states emphatically that we need 2 to 4 gigawatts of solar per year in order to have any chance of being able to get to 100%. And that's 100% renewable energy by 2050. Net zero is not a goal. That's just a placeholder. We have to get to 100% renewable by 2050 at the minimum. And I would say it should be 2040. And Massachusetts needs to get way ahead of itself here in order to be able to claim to be at the head of the pack. A small thing, I think the Mass Save incentive needs to include storage, because that's one thing that every person, every household can participate in. They don't need wind or solar on their house or in their apartment, but they can do storage. So that's something that needs to be able to be incentivized for everyone to participate. The other thing is induction cooking instead of gas cooking. An introduction would be single hot plates. I think that would be a wonderful way for people to learn about induction cooking and to be turned on by it. It's wonderful. And the last thing is that jet fuel needs to be included in the transportation climate TCIP. I'm not sure what the I stands for. So I think that covers most of my comments, and thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you, Claire. And before we go to the next speaker, I just want to remind folks that these comments will be submitted as part of the record, but we also are accepting comments online as well if you'd like to follow any of this up with written comments. So with that, I am going to go to Sue Butler. Sue, I have just given you permission to talk.
Great, got permission. Thank you so much. I'm Sue Butler. I serve on the Sierra Club Energy Committee. I really would like to support what Fran Cummings and Audrey Schulman said. We've got to get off carbon, off gas, which is not natural, and onto renewables as quickly as possible. Biomass is not an acceptable alternative. It is less productive than gas or coal and more polluting, causing particulates which have vast public health implications. Audrey's model of distributed geothermal is absolutely fantastic, and I have one here. I live in a 5-unit building where I have 2 wells that make a well water loop among 5 different heat pumps. So each apartment has its own heat pump and is able to control its heating and air conditioning. The air conditioning is going to be increasingly important because of increases in heat. There are errors in the IPCC report, with a report in 2015 from the Grantham Institute talking about how the oceans have buffered not just carbon dioxide but also heat. And if that heat had been in the air, we would have had a 68.5 degree Fahrenheit increase in temperature. So we are on a very slippery slope, thinking that we can take our time here. We've got to move quickly. We've got to get super efficient. We've got to get completely on renewables and protect our biomass, because it provides both carbon sequestration in the ground and also with evapotranspiration, it cools the earth. And there are 4 major scientists and engineers who say that if we want to solve this problem, it will happen with evapotranspiration by planting 12 billion acres of trees, grasslands, and wetlands. And what you're working on is one small part of trying to stabilize an unfolding catastrophe. And I really appreciate the way that you're addressing this and welcoming comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sue. I will go next to Sarah Ross. I am giving you permission to speak up.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
My name is Sarah Ross. I'm the co-founder of Undaunted K-12. I have a specific comment on strategy B1, and then a general comment on the Commonwealth strategy for citizen engagement. And then just, more broadly, I would certainly echo the calls for more ambition here. So specifically on strategy B1, I would urge the state, that's the avoid lock-in of building systems. I would urge the Commonwealth to leverage the current COVID-inspired attention on HVAC and ventilation in our K-12 schools to ensure that schools do not lock in with like-for-like replacements of fossil fuel-based heating systems. Schools have now received over $200 billion in COVID relief. If the Biden administration is successful in passing an infrastructure bill that includes schools, there will be more funding available. As these relief funds flow to Massachusetts, it is absolutely critical that these funds are focused on frontline communities, and that the DOER and the Massachusetts School Building Authority provide technical guidance and support to ensure that all HVAC upgrades are consistent with the goals of electrification. This guidance is urgently needed so that this spending can be aligned with the Commonwealth's climate plan. More broadly, the Commonwealth should consider making K-12 schools a centerpiece of its strategy. Schools are highly visible and highly cherished buildings in all communities. Deploying our building sector and transportation strategies in schools offer the state the opportunity to showcase the viability of these strategies to a wide array of community stakeholders, including students through integrated student learning experiences. Decarbonization of schools will lead to concrete and well-documented health and performance benefits for students and teachers, especially in frontline communities that bear the worst of climate impacts. Improvements in the energy efficiency of schools can deliver energy savings, which can support strained local budgets at this really crucial time. And as we have learned painfully through this pandemic, our schools are critical infrastructure. So resilient schools are a cornerstone of any community resilience plans. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. We're going to go next to Joe. I am allowing you to talk while I, Joe, you are unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Joe Uglietto, and I am the president of Diversified Energy Specialists. I'm an aggregator of the Massachusetts Alternative Energy Portfolio Standard. My comments will focus on the building sector. So the APS has been extremely successful, especially with using biodiesel to displace heating oil in home heating. And I was just curious why biodiesel wasn't included in part of the solution to meet the 2030 and 2050 goals in Massachusetts. 57 million gallons of heating oil has been displaced over the last few years with biodiesel through the APS program. Biodiesel, UCO based, provides 80% reduction from home heating oil, which has resulted in the elimination of more than 1 billion pounds of carbon dioxide in Massachusetts from home heating. Looking at the most used thermal technologies in Massachusetts, electricity, natural gas, heating oil, and propane. Natural gas and propane can't reduce their carbon score at scale, while electricity can reduce their carbon score through renewable electricity generation. Heating oil also has biodiesel and committed to a 40% reduction by 2030 and net zero carbon fuel by 2050 through the Providence Resolution. I think the CEPC should focus on converting natural gas and propane heating systems to electricity, while allowing heating oil industry to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions to meet the 2030 and 2050 state goals with biodiesel, while alleviating the added grid load and added cost of electricity, which will result from air source heat pump conversions. The cost to convert to heat pumps is extremely high for homeowners, and conversions will add grid load and increase the cost of electricity. Electrifying the building sector will nearly double the grid load and double the amount of renewable electricity generation needed to reach net zero carbon electricity. In addition, air source heat pumps cannot sufficiently heat homes here in Massachusetts and will need electric resistance heating as a supplementary heat source for the cold winter days. Pushing homeowners to convert to air source heat pumps will cost more than $20,000 per installation. Environmental justice populations will not be able to afford these conversions. Air source heat pump installations will only occur in mid to high income communities that can't, while environmental justice populations won't be able to afford them. This will increase the cost of electricity for all ratepayers, including in environmental justice populations. This will increase a large greenhouse gas emissions gap and a large energy affordability gap in Massachusetts, which will result in devastating effects to environmental justice populations. Biofuels can reduce greenhouse gas emissions now, which is more valuable than in 2030. In addition, biofuels can be distributed at a wide scale with no additional cost to the homeowners. I urge you to consider biodiesel as part of the solution for environmental justice populations, and I believe that the plan as written could be very harmful to environmental justice populations if biodiesel isn't considered part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. We're going next to Chris Cerami. Chris, I've just given you ability to talk. Though it looks like you are still muted. Oh, yep, go ahead, Chris.
I'm with the Take Back the Grid campaign of Boston DSA. And I want to echo some of the previous comments about mass transportation, one of the big ones. For example, rather than relying on 100,000 or so new electric vehicles being sold every year, I think it would be far more effective and equitable to expand mass transit and make it free or affordable for everyone in the state. Most people cannot afford to buy a new car, whether that's an electric vehicle or an internal combustion engine, and a tax break or a rebate program doesn't help someone who doesn't have money in the bank to purchase a new vehicle in the first place. And additionally, many residents, especially those who live in the densest, most urban parts of the state, do not have access to charging infrastructure. If you live in a multi-level apartment building, you probably don't have a garage or a dedicated parking spot where you can charge a vehicle. Similarly, low-income homeowners can't afford heating upgrades. A lot of people don't have that kind of money saved up that they can spend on something like making their home more efficient. And landlords who pass utility costs along to renters have no incentive to upgrade, as any costs that they view as unnecessary would simply cut into their profits. So the state needs to be much more active in building retrofits that aren't just for the middle and upper class homeowners. And rather than relying on markets to make utilities affordable, these utilities can and should be controlled at the local and state level and publicly funded so that they can be under more democratic control of the people who will be utilizing them. And that will allow us to get out of relying on corporations who are going to search for a cheap and quick solution rather than something that's going to long-term be sustainable for our planet.
Great, thank you, Chris. We are going to go to Maria Belen. I just gave you permission to speak.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
¿Me escuchan? Hola, mi nombre es María Belén Power y yo soy la directora asociada de Green Roots Raíces Verdes, una organización de justicia ambiental en las comunidades de Chelsea y de East Boston. Green Roots Raíces Verdes es parte del grupo de trabajo de justicia climática como parte del Consejo Asesor de Implementación. Primero quisiera agradecer por proveer interpretación para que las comunidades como la mía puedan participar. Esto es un gran paso para las comunidades de justicia ambiental. También quiero resaltar 3 temas. El primero es sobre el transporte público. Nosotros creemos que debe de haber una meta dedicada solamente al transporte público y detallar cómo el Estado se va a comprometer a electrificar los buses. Primeramente y especialmente en las poblaciones de justicia ambiental, las cuales dependen en el transporte público para poder sobrevivir. Segundo, quiero resaltar el tema de las infraestructuras de electrificación, como las plantas eléctricas o las subestaciones. A medida que vamos electrificando los sectores, especialmente el sector del transporte público y los sistemas de calefacción, el Estado tiene que asegurarse que las comunidades más impactadas por el cambio climático y la justicia ambiental no vayan a llevar otro cargo más de estas infraestructuras que pueden ser peligrosas. La secretaria de esta misma agencia, la Agencia de Asuntos Ambientales, acaba de aprobar una subestación en la comunidad de East Boston, en uno de los lugares más peligrosos que se pueden imaginar, al lado de tanques de petróleo, en un terreno que ya se ha inundado varias veces, al lado de un parque de recreación y en un vecindario increíblemente denso, en el cual mayormente viven inmigrantes de bajos recursos. Si de verdad vamos a seguir electrificando los diferentes sectores, no podemos echarle otra vez más la carga a las comunidades más pobres, las comunidades de color y las comunidades que no hablan inglés. Esto es exactamente lo opuesto a la justicia ambiental y a la justicia climática. Y como último punto, quisiera resaltar la necesidad de incorporar la justicia ambiental y la justicia climática a través de todo este plan y no solamente en algunas áreas. Muchas gracias.
And Maria Boland, thank you very much for those comments. For the English audience, I don't know, we captured them in Spanish. If you would like to provide translation, or we could have the interpreter provide that, we could make that happen, or you can leave it. I want to give you that option.
Perdón, yo pensé que iba a haber interpretación al inglés también.
And I unfortunately did not understand that, but I will give you a
Oh,
moment.
I'm sorry. I thought there was, I thought there would be interpretation both ways, into Spanish and into English, for it to be bilingual.
I think in this Spanish room, they probably just let you speak, go ahead. And then in the other, oh, unfortunately, yes, the other rooms, unless they know Spanish, they would not be able to translate it from their language.
I guess, sorry, I'll just finish by, I mean, I obviously provided comments with some like content that is important to share, and I can share that in English. I guess the point about language interpretation is that it can't just be one way. It needs to be 2 ways for the conversation to be really fluid.
Thank you. Anything else you'd like to add, or else I can move on.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm going to go next to Connor Rocket. Connor, if you are able to, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm a Forest Policy Fellow at New England Forestry Foundation based in Littleton, speaking on behalf of the organization. I'm also a Cambridge resident. Today, NEF conserves and manages over 140 community forests, totaling more than 30,000 acres throughout New England, and is working to advance climate solutions from the forest sector. Our comments relate to the land sector and building sector strategies in the report. We commend EEA for including strategy L3 to incentivize regional manufacture and use of durable wood products. We recommend bolstering this strategy by including a quantitative embodied carbon standard or benchmark for state-funded construction in the CECP. Requiring construction materials to meet an embodied carbon standard would help lower emissions from the building sector and indirectly incentivize the use of local sustainably harvested wood products, such as mass timber. The policy would tie sustainable construction practices to climate smart forest management for long-lived wood products, which is an elegant joint solution for both the building and forest sector. California and other states that lead in climate action have begun to adopt embodied carbon standards, and NEF urges EEA to set Massachusetts on a path to do the same for the CECP. Thank you again for your consideration of our comments, which we will elaborate on in written form, and for your leadership to address the climate crisis.
Thank you very much, Connor. Next to Elizabeth Sockwell, I have just given you permission.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so hi, my name is Elizabeth Sockwell. I'm from Newton, Massachusetts. I'm the leader of the 4C Tree Project, which is a COVID-19 tree memorial where we're going to plant 170 trees in honor of those who passed away due to COVID-19. And I'm actually currently a local environmental policy intern with the city councilor in Newton, Massachusetts. So I've been learning a lot recently about promoting sustainable local and community economic development. And one thing that really was frustrating for me was when I started to look online for what resources were available to the average person, I kept stumbling upon report after lengthy report, done obviously by all these experts, right? The Cadmus Group, like all these various, big wealthy firms that are, these reports are done obviously with tax-paying dollars. And to me, what's frustrating is, no, at this point, Massachusetts, let's be honest, we are no longer a leader in terms of the environment. The Global Warming Solution Act of 2008 was passed when I was in elementary school. I'm 23 now. It's really unacceptable. It's emotional. And also, but I'm going to stick to the facts. So if we go to page 6 of the building section report, it states that if we now implement net zero on-site policy, if we put that in place by 2023, we might only reduce emissions by 87%. And so this is written in the report that was published in December. And I'm really frustrated because if that was published in December, then why is Governor Baker vetoing a bill that will simply allow cities like Newton to put in place net zero energy building requirements, which is a necessity if we want to get to 100% renewable energy by 2050. And really, this comes down to, are we going to be loyal to big developers, which is clearly where Governor Baker's loyalty lies, or are we going to be loyal to vulnerable communities who are going to be the worst impacted by the climate crisis, by rising sea levels, by the all the problems that are coming with climate change? And I'm sick and tired and upset, but I believe in action, and I believe in local community action, and I really hope that my words will be heard. I've been calling Governor Baker. I called for the past, multiple weeks, and I'm just worried that, local people's voices aren't being heard. We don't need any more fancy reports. We need reports that are actually written by, nonprofits who are actually going to be doing the work. I think a lot of local environmental nonprofits should be included. We need more public-private partnerships and better governance here in Massachusetts. And I want Massachusetts to be a leader. I'm going to stay here my whole life. I love Boston. So I say this as someone with a lot of respect and appreciation for the city of Boston. I love the city of Boston, and I love Massachusetts. And I just hope that, we can use this time to pass stringent policy that protects vulnerable communities, that safeguards our clean water, our clean air, and that revives our economy by building jobs.
Alyssa, can you please wrap up?
Yeah, so overall, I just want to say we can have a more resilient and strong economy if we transition to clean energy, and we don't need any more reports, we need action. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And I am going to thank you very much for folks who have registered in advance and spoken. I want to know for anyone who might be on the phone, if you can please press *9 to raise your hand if you do have any comments. I want to make sure that we don't lose track of you as we get through the list. But next, I'm going to go to Brian Campbell. Brian, I've just given you permission.
So can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, this is Brian Campbell. I'm an electrical engineer educated at UMass Lowell. I originally was in a renewable energy track there, but this was like 35 years ago. We also have a nuclear reactor at UMass Lowell. And I interfaced, the renewable energy track has been a pretty good career for me, but I am now of the opinion that we must go nuclear. One of the things that I want to point out is Massachusetts, 73.3 million gigatons of emissions in 2018. Our goal is to get to 70.8. Okay, that's 22.7 reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. We didn't make it, not even with COVID. And the reason why is because we shut down Pilgrim nuclear power plant. That was 62% of our renewable, of our clean energy, including hydro and the renewables that have been installed in the last 20 years at a tremendous cost. And Pilgrim could have operated until 2032. It had a license until then. It makes no sense to me that we have done this, that we're not supporting our two last reactors in New England right now, which are Millstone, it's got 2 reactors, and Seabrook Nuclear Station in New Hampshire. Instead, the state actively campaigns to shut those down by supporting an organization called C2 up in Newburyport to a tune of about $180,000 a year. It's crazy. And I got these figures from the Energy Information Administration that the Department of Energy runs. And the biggest thing I want to show, that I want to talk about, is that anybody can see how good nuclear is by just comparing our grid, our ISO New England grid, to Ontario's nuclear powered grid. It's got about 65% nuclear compared to about 20% in New England. And the price for per kilowatt hour is twice as cheap in Ontario as in New England. I'm paying 23 cents a kilowatt hour in Cambridge, okay? And the emissions in Ontario are the lowest in North America. And
Brian, can you
I appreciate you for letting me speak, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Great. We want to make sure we can get to everyone. I see a couple of new hands are up. If anyone is preparing to make comments, please do raise your hands, and I'll try to time accordingly. But I'm going to go to Pamela Kelly now. Pamela, I've just given you permission, so you should be able to unmute. Go ahead, Pamela.
So my biggest concern is actually that we don't have anything in this that I can see so far that's on job creation and training. And you can't electrify everything unless you've got electricians. And our electricians are very curtailed. If to get a master electrician, you have to have a master electrician for every site. And one apprentice only per master or journeyman electrician, unless you do something about really gearing up for the training of jobs, you're not going to get anywhere. Then the other thing is on financing. We've had a proposal before the legislature for 5 years, I believe now, on green banks, a proven system that will generate $3.5 for every of private investment for every $1 of public investment. It's getting a very strong support at the federal level, but we have to have a vehicle for collecting federal money that hopefully will be coming from the National Green Bank, which is called the Accelerator. It's now been introduced as of today by the chair of the National Energy Committee. There's a good chance that it might pass. And if it passes, it's asking for $100 billion over 10 years. I believe that that will be enough, but to help move the financial opportunities that are available through states, but we have to have a vehicle to move that money. And that legislation has been introduced by my state representative, vice chair of the TUE for the House, Paul Mark, and that's a green bank bill. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. We'll go next to Gia Neswald. I've just unmuted you, so go ahead, Gia.
Hi, Claire. Thank you for your emails earlier today. You've been most kind. I'd like to reiterate the request of about 20 people to extend our comments deadline to the 31st due to the fact that we are still trying to get answers to questions that we thought we might receive from the presentation. And I appreciate your help working toward that, Claire. Another comment I think is of great importance is that our greatest terrestrial, both carbon sink and carbon storage facility is our forests. And we're blessed with a large number of forests, which would sequester about 30% of our emissions, at least on a national level, that's the number. However, all forests are not created equal. It is scientifically known and will be documented in our written comments that the largest 1% of trees sequester 30% of the carbon in a temperate forest, such as those in the Northeast here. And it is those very trees that are being targeted for the majority of durable wood products, which are estimated in the plan to have a lifespan of up to 100 years. Our forests are relatively young and have an additional lifespan of perhaps unlimited, and that will be documented if allowed to grow naturally. In any case, the individual trees are on average 120 years, or I'm sorry, the oldest trees are 120 years old. They have a lifespan of another 200 to 300 years, barring any disaster like climate change. And we need them. We need them much more for sequestering carbon than for becoming alternatives for quick incineration, and which would produce emissions up to 300% that of natural gas and 150% of coal. Or for durable wood products, we need to go to hemp and other alternatives that allow our trees to do their most important job. I'd also like to state that there should be no land sector plan until there's a proper inventory. And you and I, Claire, have been talking about the fact that there's no inventory yet for carbon sequestration, which, you know, that's about a third of the carbon that we're holding. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Gia. We'll go to Tony Beatty. Tony, I'm giving you permissions. Should be able to unmute.
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
So I am a selectman in the town of Pepperell. I'm also a long-term farmer, and I would like to see farms have a greater role in the climate change policies. I think that even though we're 6% of our land mass, we have a great role in food security as well as in sequestering carbon in our soils. There are two bills that I've worked on with Senator Ed Kennedy that will be coming up to the State House. One is to support dual use solar on farms, which will allow farms to sell electrons back into the grid and create a second revenue stream, which will help farms who are mostly in distress economically. The other bill is to organize, this is going into a study, I believe, how to get our feedstock, our waste feedstock, into a compost facility that's licensed and under state control, and how to facilitate getting that compost into our soils, whether it be farm soils, municipal soils, lawns, etc. And halfway, I learned that the USDA is working on improved soil testing so that we can actually map carbon content, microbes, water holding capacities of our soils, which will be a great step in inventorying what we have now and how we can improve on that, measure that, and report on that improvement. And lastly, as a selectman, I've initiated and we've appointed a climate change committee in Pepperell, whose task is to help the town pass out what opportunities there are given through the federal government or the state government or by our own initiatives to address our carbon footprint, to be in step with the state and the federal government. And my wish, and I've talked to Lori Trahan about this, Congresswoman Lori Trahan, that I think all towns in Massachusetts and across this country should have a like committee so that we have a standardization of a board that the state can rely on at the local level to implement plans and then report back on their success. So thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to go to Eugenia. I have just given you permissions.
All right, you can hear me?
Good.
Thank you so much. I want to thank EEA for hosting this webinar and also last week's webinar. Both did include language translation, and I think certainly, as Maria Belen Power's remarks earlier underscored, the importance of two-way communication as a cornerstone of meaningful engagement and inclusive processes cannot be overstated. We're not quite there yet, but this is a really important step in that direction, and it is greatly appreciated, so thank you. I will be joining my colleagues from the Climate Justice Working Group and also from the environmental community submitting detailed comments next week. But I wanted to offer a couple of additional thoughts for now. One is that it is really imperative that we factor fully all of the health benefits associated with the clean energy transition, and that we consider these when we are doing comprehensive climate planning in Massachusetts. I greatly appreciate the economic and health impacts report that accompanied the draft CECP, but I would argue that it contains conservative estimates of the various benefits associated with transitioning to a decarbonized future. And I would really urge EEA and all of us to delve more deeply into what those full benefits could be, rather than focusing almost exclusively and almost to our detriment on GHG emission reductions. We have a portfolio of policies that need to be addressed and complied with, and so I really encourage us to take a holistic approach to do that. And then as the COVID crisis has demonstrated, and I think we all know this, I certainly hope we know this, unfortunately, it is low-income communities and communities of color that are continually and disproportionately burdened by health inequality, economic insecurity, food insecurity, housing insecurity, energy insecurity, all of these things. And these are the communities that are on the front line of the climate crisis. I implore EEA, the Baker administration, and all of us to learn from the very hard lessons of the last year and recognize fully the inextricable link between climate, health, and equity. And then we need to plan and implement accordingly. It is not enough for us to say the right things. It is really time for us to do the right things. So toward that end, I would like to ask EEA to please include in the text of the final document the recommendations that were voted on by the IAC, which includes guiding principles that are referenced on a page of the document. I can't recall exactly what page at this moment, as well as climate justice considerations. Please include those in the final report document as opposed to just linking to them as a footnote in the document. I think they're a very important point to start the conversation. Thank you so much. The work that you all are doing is tremendously appreciated, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you. I'm going to go next to Rosemary. I have just given you permission to talk, so you should be able to unmute yourself, Rosemary.
Thank you so much. My name is Rosemary Wessel. I'm with Berkshire Environmental Action Team, and the CECP is a program that outlines how to reduce fossil fuel use from our current emission levels. Not enough, in our opinion. We do support the comments of others who say we need to be more aggressive, but it doesn't address not adding the new fossil fuels that are slated to be added in the immediate future. There are currently proposed projects before the DPU and other regulatory permitting agencies, including a new peaker power plant in Peabody that would run on oil, an LNG facility in Charlton, pipeline expansions by Eversource, and of course the biomass power plant near Springfield that are under consideration right now. There needs to be an immediate halt of these projects or an accounting of these projects in the plan. We need to commit us even more to reducing emissions that are currently coming online right now. I hope that accounting is being taken into account, but we really need provisions in place to stop from adding more emissions before, while we're waiting for this to be approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm going to go next to Mike Duclos. I've just given you permission to talk, and I'll also just note that we are nearing time. We only have a couple of hands left, so I think we're going to try to stick with it and hear everybody out, but please do remember to keep your comments brief. And Mike, it looks like you're still muted on your end. Oh, there you go. Go ahead.
Can you hear me, Claire?
Yep.
Great, thanks very much. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the tremendous amount of work that has gone into the 2030 CECP. This is an impressive effort, which has surfaced some challenges when implementation details are considered for some key components. The challenge of thermal enclosure improvements and heating electrification, which I'll call retrofits, of 1 million homes by 2030 is about 400 homes each weekday for the next 10 years. A compelling public education program should be initiated soon, since it will take some time for the message to be understood, discussed, and accepted by the public before retrofits can be realized at scale. Large-scale retrofit workforce training is needed. Heat pump equipment cost and availability should be addressed by a supply chain management program, such as developed in Vermont. Strategies to address the wide variety of home designs, maintenance approaches, and heating and cooling distribution systems should be developed in consultation with the implementers, thermal enclosure specialists, and HVAC installers. Compelling incentives to entice massive numbers of homeowners, renters in multi-unit buildings, low income, moderate income, need to be designed, financed, and implemented. The CECP heating fuel emissions cap program must be designed, implemented, and operate for long enough that the fuel price impact is visible to homeowners as current fuel prices which will be a critical part of the value proposition used to sell retrofits to the public. To be sure all of the above components necessary to sell retrofits at scale are available in time, we may have to think differently. We may need to consider a rapid deployment model scheduled by starting at 2030 and working backwards in time to determine the date at which each of the key components outlined above must be in place to deliver the 2030 emissions reduction in time. At the very least, the next CECP should include a strawman project timeline with implementation deadlines for all key components to assess the feasibility of the CECP as written, and so we can track progress over time. Finally, the actual energy use must be monitored to confirm the anticipated emission reductions are realized, so corrective action can be taken in time to meet the 2030 goal. Thanks very much for the extraordinary effort that has gone into the CECP and for the opportunity to comment.
Great, thank you, Mike. I'm going to go to Edward Wool. Edward, you should have permission. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for putting on this very, very helpful and educational program. My comment is focused on the 1 million heat pumps. And my concern is that there are probably over 500,000 dwellings in Massachusetts of the 3 million in the state that have old wiring and no insulation. And in order to use a heat pump, you need to upgrade that 16 amp knob and tube wiring to 100 amps. And most of those dwellings are going to be in low income, frontline, or environmental justice communities. And many of those are rentals. So the issue becomes, of course, that a house that's uninsulated in those communities uses 3 times as much energy as an ordinary insulating house. So those 500,000 dwellings are equivalent to 1.5 million regular dwellings. And that seems to be the low-hanging fruit. And those need to be financed. So it suggests that the administration is committed to financing that conversion of those homes already by proposing the conversion to them to 1 million heat pumps. And I see you're using partly the Mass Save programs, but it'd be nice to go ahead and outline the other means by which you'll finance those conversions, because that's the low-hanging fruit. And if you don't finance them and convert those first, you'll leave the burden of the gas system, the cost of the gas system, on those low-income, frontline, and environmental justice communities. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Edward. I'm going now to Bill Green. I've just given you permissions, and then we have John and Michael remaining on the list as we go into overtime. But go ahead, Bill. Oh, it looks like it's clear. Bill, are you able to speak? Okay, we will come back to you. I'm going to go to John now. Go ahead, John.
Hi, thank you. My name is John Bonapani. I'm a United Steelworkers Union representative. I represent probably about, well, the steelworkers represent 2,000 people employed with gas utilities in the state of Massachusetts. I wanted to speak to workforce development and protection, but after really taking a look at the plan, I kind of wanted to speak about the plan itself and make some comments. So a couple of the previous commenters talked about geothermal districts and biofuels and the how they weren't really addressed in the plan. Along with that, I don't think a lot of types of energy where the existing pipeline could be utilized, things like hydrogen and RNG, they weren't addressed. And I think it's a mistake. I think if you look at the end use type pathways that the plan prescribes for building and transportation, they rely almost exclusively on electrification. The goals are really beyond reality. They're very costly, as one of the previous callers just mentioned. I think 1 million conversions over the next 10 years, and I'm guessing another 20 million for the next 20 years after that. It's going to cost a lot of people a lot of money. It's going to land on working people that are going to have a hard time being able to do that. We need a diverse energy portfolio that includes all types of energies that are available, and that includes gas. When it comes to worker development and protection, these climate plans do not address what happens to the workforce and the employees as the plan evolves. That's a mistake. You really need to come up with a concrete way to address this. The recent climate bill, I think, prescribes like $12 million for the Mass Clean Energy Technology Center to disperse for workforce development. It's not going to cut it. And I really hope the powers to be take another look at it. So thank you for the time to speak.
Thank you, John. I'm going to try again for Bill Green. Bill, are you able to speak? All right. Unfortunately, it looks good on our end, but we cannot hear you. We'll try one more time, but for now, I'm going to go to Michael. I have just given you permission to speak. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Thanks. My name is Michael Ferrante. I represent the Mass Energy Marketers Association. I'm also a non-voting member of the Mass DOER's Energy Efficiency Advisory Council. Our trade association represents the heating oil industry. Our members serve about 800,000 customers statewide with heating oil and renewable liquid biofuel, which is a blend of heating oil and clean biofuels made from various feedstocks, also known as biodiesel, bioheat. It's important to note here that many also deliver propane and electric heat technologies. On that technology, I'll be submitting more extensive comments, but I want to be on the record tonight with a couple of comments. The heating oil industry, as you heard from a couple of other speakers, is committed to the state's effort to alter the impact of climate change. We've proven that we have a drop-in and immediate remedy for reducing carbon emissions and contributing to these efforts with renewable liquid heating fuel or heating oil blended with biodiesel. He recognizes fuel in the renewable fuel standard as advanced fuels. And the Mass DOER's program, APS program, which you heard earlier from one of our speakers, launched in 2018, incentivizes biofuel blends in heating oil, is proof that this renewable fuel is currently reducing CO2e emissions in Mass by billions of pounds. The 2030 draft plan, quite frankly, doesn't recognize this fuel's use as a transition fuel to net zero, and it should. So we asked that the plan incorporates biofuels as a key component in reducing GHG emissions, and that EOEEA reinstate the 2008 law, an act relative to clean energy biofuels. That law was the first statute in the US to mandate the blending of renewable advanced biofuels for both home heating oil and on-road diesel. That law was never implemented and should be reinstated immediately. Under Secretary Chang in last week's session spoke of considering, quote, all clean heating solutions, and that climate change action, quote, just can't wait. The biofuel mandate is your pathway, plain and simple. Finally, our association wants to voice very strong opposition to the climate plan's support eliminating mass save rebates and zero interest heat loans for customers seeking financial assistance to replace their older heating system with new high efficiency heating systems. In brief, this effort by Mass DOER is wrong. The attempt to use electric ratepayer efficiency funds to erode the heating oil industry by limiting this program is really simply wrong, and Mass DOER and EOEEA are overstepping their authority with these recommendations in our view. It's a restraint of trade and a misuse of electric ratepayer funds. And quite honestly, you're endeavoring to remove a customer's choice to choose a heating source for their family and their home. So those recommendations in closing are unfair and I believe discriminatory, and will have a significant impact on low and moderate income households and the environmental justice community. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak tonight, and we look forward to submitting written comments.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm going to try once more for Bill Green, and let's see, Bill. All right, unfortunately, we cannot hear you, but just a reminder to everyone to please submit written comments if you would have anything additional that you'd like to add. They are due on Monday at 5 p.m. the 22nd, and that website is mass.gov/2030 CECP. I'll pass it back to Undersecretary Chang to close us out.
Thank you very much, everyone, for participating and spending the time to think about your comments and then delivering it tonight. Thank you very much, everyone. And I hope that not only have you reviewed the report, but also heard each other. And I very much appreciate all of your efforts. Thank you very much. And we look forward to written comments next week. Thank you.